Picture this Glenn Hughes, the iconic bassist and vocalist. His soulful voice, once filling arenas, now speaking in hushed tones about a subject long buried beneath the weight of rock history, his fraught and painful relationship with Gary Moore. Fans have always worshipped Moore as a guitar god, a man whose fingers conjured raw emotion with every note. But beneath the dazzling solos and the searing blues riffs lay a much darker reality, one of torment, fractured relationships, and a relentless trail of conflict that followed him to his grave. Moore's career sparkled with undeniable brilliance, yet it was a fragile, haunted existence marred by his own uncompromising nature. He was a man who demanded perfection, but often left chaos in his wake. For Hughes, their time together was not the fairy tale of musical synergy that fans might imagine. It was a battlefield. Two forces of nature, both gifted and burdened with overwhelming personalities, colliding in ways that left wounds too deep to heal. In the early 1918s, Moore and Hughes seemed like a match made in musical heaven, two powerhouse musicians with a deep love for blues and rock. But behind the scenes, their collaboration was a battleground of egos and expectations. Moore's relentless pursuit of perfection clashed with Hughes' free-spirited improvisational approach. Think of the tension in those recording sessions, Moore meticulously crafting each note, demanding precision, while Hughes, driven by emotion and spontaneity, pushed for raw energy and soul. Their creative visions, though initially aligned, soon became a source of conflict. Hughes' well-documented struggles with addiction only added fuel to the fire, and Moore, never one to mince words, grew increasingly frustrated with Hughes' lack of reliability. The breaking point came when Hughes' personal struggles began affecting his performances, and Moore, ever the perfectionist, saw no other option but to part ways. It was an ugly split, one that left behind a trail of resentment and unspoken words. For Hughes, it was another painful chapter in a life filled with struggles. For Moore, it was just another in a long line of soured collaborations. But Hughes wasn't the only musician to find himself at odds with Moore. In the late 1970s, Moore's on-again, off-again relationship with Thin Lizzy and its charismatic frontman, Phil Lynott, was fraught with tension. Moore had joined the band during a crucial period, bringing his virtuosic guitar work to their sound, but his intense personality and high standards often clashed with Lynott's laid-back, party-fooled lifestyle. While the two shared a deep musical chemistry, their friendship was overshadowed by mutual frustration. Moore found it difficult to handle the chaotic lifestyle that defined Thin Lizzy, and his growing discomfort with Lynott's spiraling drug use led to explosive arguments. Their relationship, once filled with mutual respect, turned sour, and Moore abruptly left the band mid-2 in 1979, leaving Lynott and the rest of the band in the lurch. For years, their falling out remained one of rock's most heartbreaking rifts, with Moore later expressing regret over their unresolved issues after Lynott's untimely death in 1986. In the 1990s, Moore tried to rekindle his magic by teaming up with two rock legends, Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker, in the short-lived supergroup BBM. On paper, it was a dream lineup, Bruce's thundering bass lines, Baker's fiery drumming, and Moore's blistering guitar work. But in reality, it was a ticking time bomb. Both Bruce and Baker, veterans of Cream, had their own long-standing tensions, and Moore's dominating presence only added to the mix. Arguments over creative direction, conflicting egos, and the sheer weight of their individual legacies made every rehearsal a battleground. Bruce, known for his sharp tongue, often butted heads with Moore's no-nonsense approach, while Baker's unpredictable personality only added chaos to an already volatile situation. The band released one album, around the next dream, but behind the scenes the cracks were already visible. Moore's frustration with the lack of discipline and cohesion led to heated confrontations, and before long the project collapsed under the weight of its internal struggles. Moore's fiery personality wasn't just limited to his professional life. It seeped into his personal relationships as well. His marriages were plagued by the same issues that haunted his career: control, perfectionism, and an inability to compromise. His first marriage ended in heartbreak, with his relentless dedication to music leaving little room for family life. His second marriage, though filled with moments of love, was equally strained by his mercurial temperament and long absences due to touring. His children, growing up in the shadow of their father's relentless pursuit of musical greatness, often felt the sting of his absence. Picture a young Moore, guitar always in hand, oblivious to the moment slipping away, birthdays missed, family gatherings sacrificed in the name of his craft. Despite his love for them, his inability to strike a balance left scars that would take years to mend. Though not as publicly known as Hughes's battles, Moore struggled with his own demons, addiction to alcohol and a growing sense of isolation that accompanied his rise to fame. As his career progressed, the pressure to live up to his reputation weighed heavily on him. Nights that should have been filled with celebration turned into solitary bouts, with the music that once brought him joy became both his sanctuary and his prison. His mental health took a toll in his later years, with bouts of depression creeping in as the years of excess caught up with him. Friends and colleagues often described him as a man who carried the weight of his own expectations on his shoulders, never quite able to find the peace he so desperately sought. As the years passed, Gary Moore found himself adrift in a world that once worshipped him, but now seemed to have moved on. The relentless energy that had once fueled his meteoric rise, the raw fire that had burned through every note of his guitar, began to wane. The crowds grew smaller, the tours less frequent, and the albums that once burst with vitality now carried a weight of introspection and melancholy. The stage, his sanctuary, his battlefield, was no longer the place where he could outrun the demons that had chased him for decades. Instead, it became a haunting reminder of what he once was and what he could never be again. Imagine the contrast. Moore, once a commanding figure, shredding his guitar with electrifying passion in front of thousands, now sitting alone in dimly lit dressing rooms, staring at his reflection in the mirror, searching for the man he used to be. The once thriving career that defined him had slowed to a crawl, leaving him isolated in a world that thrived on reinvention, while he remained tethered to the ghosts of his past. Friends drifted away, relationships crumbled, and the fire that once burned so brightly within him flickered in the darkness of regret and solitude. Despite the slowing pace, Moore never completely walked away. He continued to record and tour, but something had changed. The ferocity that once defined his sound had softened, replaced by a reflective, almost mournful tone. He poured his soul into the blues, but the struggle was no longer just in the music. It was in his very existence. Each performance was not only an attempt to reclaim his place in rock history, but a plea for connection, for meaning beyond the life he had built around his instrument. Yet, the more he sought solace in music, the further away it seemed to drift. In 2011, the inevitable happened. Alone in a Spanish hotel room, far from the adoring crowds and the camaraderie of the rock scene, Moore's heart finally gave out. The man who had lived his life at full volume, who had pushed himself to the very limits of his art and soul, met an end as quiet as it was tragic. No encore, no screaming fans, just the cold silence of a life that had burned too fast, too fiercely. The news of his death sent shockwaves through the music world. yet those closest to him knew that it had been a long time coming. Moore had been fighting a battle that few could see, one of loneliness, of regret, and of a constant search for something he could never quite find. His legacy was undeniable, but it was laced with questions. What could have been? What if he had made peace with his demons? What if he had allowed himself to truly enjoy the success he had earned? As tributes poured in, they painted a picture of a man who had given everything to his craft, but perhaps never enough to himself. Moore's life was a cautionary tale of brilliance and burden, of triumph and tragedy. His passing was not just the loss of a gifted musician, it was the closing of a book filled with unrealized potential, unresolved conflicts, and an eternal longing for something beyond the strings of his guitar. Gary Moore's legacy is a haunting paradox, an artist of extraordinary brilliance, yet a man weighed down by the wreckage of his own relentless pursuit of perfection. His guitar spoke in ways that words never could, each note dripping with raw emotion and unfiltered power. And yet behind that mastery lay a deeply conflicted soul, one that found solace in music, but struggled endlessly with the human connections that should have grounded him. Moore's relationships were often as turbulent as his searing solos, fractured, intense, and ultimately unfulfilled. His legendary clashes with fellow musicians such as Glenn Hughes, Phil Lynott, and Jack Bruce weren't just fleeting disagreements. They were profound, emotionally charged collisions of vision and ego. Moore was a man who demanded everything from himself and expected nothing less from those around him. Whether it was Hughes' free-spirited approach to music clashing with Moore's precision, or Lynott's chaotic rock and roll lifestyle conflicting with his more structured discipline, Moore's relationships with his peers were often defined by tension rather than camaraderie. These conflicts weren't just creative disagreements, they were wars of identity, battles fought over artistic integrity and the unyielding need for control. Think of the man who stood on stage, his fingers effortlessly weaving intricate melodies, while off stage he battled with loneliness and a relentless sense of dissatisfaction. Success, it seemed, was never enough for Moore. Every hit album, every sold-out show only fueled his hunger for more. He was always pushing, always searching for the perfect sound, the perfect band, the perfect moment that always seemed just out of reach. And in that quest, he left behind a trail of broken relationships, opportunities squandered, and wounds that time could never truly heal. Even as his music continues to inspire generations, the undercurrent of his story remains a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that greatness often demands a heavy price. The emotional cost of Moore's uncompromising nature was etched into every riff and every lyric, but beyond the stage lights, the weight of his choices bore down on him like a relentless shadow. His brilliance was undeniable, his influence immeasurable, but his life was a testament to the brutal reality that even the most gifted artists are not immune to their own demons. For every fan who marvels at the soul in his music, there is also a recognition of the man behind it, a man who, despite his genius, was left longing for something deeper, something more meaningful than the fleeting applause of the crowd. In the end, Gary Moore's legacy is not just a celebration of his artistry, but a bitter-sweet reflection of a life spent chasing perfection at the expense of personal happiness. And that, perhaps, is the most tragic note of all.